Here we go. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me today. Yesterday we kind of set up our ledger site. We kind of did a light tour, and we discussed different account types and how to just add those into our chart of accounts. But now that we have everything set up, now we can actually start to use it. And a big part of your ledger software is going to be entering in transactions. So we're going to go over many different ways that you can enter in those transactions, from deposits, checks, payments, etc., as well as how to make them recurring, how to void them, and kind of how to check up on them on your statement of income and expense, just to make sure that everything is going the way that you need it to be. So we'll just start with me. My name is Taylor Brown. I am a software support technician here at Concordia, and I've really been enjoying my job. I'm not the best person in front of a camera, but I am very passionate about learning our software and helping our churches. So it's an opportunity I never thought I'd be able to get. So I'm really excited. All phones and microphones have been muted, so you're only going to be listening to me right now. However, we do have a little question area in your little GoToWebinar little interaction board right there. And there is going to be a little question area where you can type up questions just as it comes to you. So no need to have to wait till the end of it and possibly forget your question. Just feel free to just write in your question, and my manager, Rod Kiles, he is going to kind of be in that little question area, and he'll be answering it as they come in. Anything that he doesn't get to, however, will be more than happy to handle it after the webinar. So I can definitely stay here to answer questions as they are needed. And if it's more specific to your software, then we can always arrange either a call or an email. So just as a light overview of the topics that we're going to cover today, we're going to just kind of have the discussion. We call it discussion, but it's mostly me just talking to you guys just about our different aspects. Depending on the time, if I run a little long, I might have a little intermission, but if we just keep going along and nobody needs a break, then we can just skip that, just finish up our discussion. Then we'll have just a little bit of a quiz. So it's not going to be graded, not going to title on you to your pastor, just to make sure that specific aspects of the software are just reinforced. And then the rest of the time is going to be a Q&A session. So, I do have a lot of content, but I don't really see it going over an hour. It should be within that hour range. Might be a little less, might be a little more, but I will definitely try to keep everything concise, and anything you guys need elaborated on, I'm more than happy to go over that afterwards. So we're going to go over a myriad of different topics today, including just the conventions and the debit and crediting system with different transactions, including actually looking at a debit versus credit kind of T-chart, just to kind of help you figure out exactly where to put those amounts for different tasks. Then we're actually going to go over the different transactions, and first there would be the deposits, then checks, including printing checks, making payments, and transferring between accounts. And then for everything in between, we have our journal entries. And we'll just be going over that and more if you guys need to. So we'll go ahead and get it started. So just as just kind of an introduction for these transactions, there are a few conventions just to keep in mind. Some similarities, it's that Every transaction in the ledger software, it has to have a date so that it can be placed within its correct fiscal year, naturally. And they do have the option to include a descriptive memo, if you just need a little extra information. They will have a minimum of 2 line items, one for credit and one for debit, just to make sure. And then these transactions will not save unless the credits and the debits are equal. So unless that difference is 0, then there's going to have to be some tweaking before that transaction is going to be able to be posted. So before we get to our transaction chart, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my webcam just so the screen's just a little bit bigger for you guys. So then just on the object of credits and debits, depending on the account that you are making the transaction for, and depending on whether or not you want it to increase or decrease, then you would probably want to reference this chart. So our ledger software does use fund accounting with dual entry bookkeeping, hence those 2 line items. And it's always a cash-based system as well. So if you use kind of an accrual system, then we might need to have some nuances with that, and you're more than welcome to discuss that with support. But just to see how every account kind of affects each other, this credit and debit view should be rather helpful, and it's also available on our help center. So for asset accounts, if you're going to debit, that's going to increase and the credit will be decreasing. And right under that, we have restricted funds, which is kind of unique to the ledger software. It might be a little bit different from different financial softwares. It is different from the dedicated accounts in Shepherd Staff if you moved from there. And the idea of the restricted account is that it's actually held in the asset account. So if you thought of the asset account as a pie, there's going to be the restricted part, and then there's going to be an unrestricted part. So it's not really an IOU. It doesn't act like a liability or an equity. It just acts more like an asset as far as debits and credits are concerned. And for that reason, it most likely can use its own offset account as opposed to having to use the overall asset account. For liabilities, it's just kind of the reverse. It's kind of what you owe as opposed to what you have. So the increase and decrease with the credits and debits are reversed. And then we have the income and expense. So for the credit and debit aspect of it, the income acts kind of more like the liability in that the credit increases it and the debit decreases it. And for expense, the debit increases it and the credit decreases it. So our first transaction that I'll be going over is our deposits. So, very basic. It's just what you deposit into your asset accounts. And this can include your offerings, any sort of rental income, just anything that you earn and you're adding onto your bank account. And since it's mostly just an increase, it's going to be limited to asset and income accounts. So, if you choose to use liability accounts as opposed to restricted accounts, then you would need to make a journal entry from the asset account to the liability in the event that you want to move those funds over. And a unique aspect of deposits is that we also have another Church360 software called 360 Members. And it's kind of our church management software where you put in your membership, your attendance, and your offering information so that you can create statements at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter, whichever you need, so that your members can submit that for taxes. But in addition to that, when you enter in those offerings are actually synced up with your Church360 ledger software. So it kind of saves you a step from having to input those manually. And we'll just be going over that in just a second. So let's just go ahead, exit out of the slide. And here you can see my ledger site right here. Up here, you can see my home button here where it's the little dollar sign, the Christ Community Church. That's the book that I've selected. It's just my own set of particular accounts. So all of these are separate, but I'm going to mostly just be in the Christ Community Church book right now, and just work with those accounts for right now. Further over, you can see my print queue for checks. We'll be going over that in just a second, but right next to it, you are going to see pending transactions. And if you look at these pending transactions, some of them are going to have this little green icon. So that's our icon for Church360 members. So if you ever see that icon, you know it's coming over. And as opposed to inputting a deposit in, every time you get your offerings, it'll actually sync up with your Church360 member software and move over those offerings over as a deposit. So if you go over to these pending transactions and click on this particular deposit, you can see different funds. And in fact, I can actually move over to Church360 members real quick, just to kind of give you that aspect. So this is our Church360 members software. And up here, you can enter in your offerings. So just as a quick refresher, I would just go up here to batch, choose a particular date, and then I can add in the offerings that I want. So I could just choose for loose offerings, I put 100 or 1,000. Either one will work. And then just put maybe 100 for another person and for a different fund. And you can see these different funds that are going to be attributed to your church management software. So here you're going to see your general fund, your mission fund, and your vacation Bible school. So you want to keep those in mind. So now that I've entered those have already been entered into the management software. So I can actually go back to my ledger software. And here you can see it's 1303 right now. If I refresh, if it doesn't make me a liar, you can see that it's now 1304 and I have that brand new deposit right here. So whichever date that you put in for that batch, that's going to be the date for the deposit as well. And if you remember those three different contribution funds, then when you open up the deposit, you can see those little tags right here, just to kind of give you an idea on what they specified this money to be for. And with that just kind of in mind, you can then choose your account based on what contribution fund you chose. And here we can see we have the general fund here, the mission fund here. I've already used those previously, so it remembered that, hey, if it goes into this contribution fund, it goes into this income account. And same as Vacation Bible School, if it's not already filled in, if you just click inside the field, then we can choose that particular income account to connect that to the contribution fund. And so now we have those income accounts already selected. So it just kind of saves you just quite a few steps in choosing which income account each contribution fund goes into. So it just saves you a little time. But circling back, you can go back to for your deposit, we can make a memo, just like any other deposit. If we so choose, we can say offerings from Sunday, just to know that this is what was collected that day. You do have the option to add in a payee, just as you can see, just completely optional. Naturally, if you're just going to be depositing it, no need for that. And now that you have all of your income accounts chosen and all of these added up into $1,300, now on the other side, you're going to have to choose an asset account. So typically, whenever you look at the ledger software, I can't think of any instance where debits won't be on the left and credits won't be on the right. So just to let you know, so if you ever think of the debit credit system, usually whatever's on the left is debit and what's on the right is credit. And looking back at our credit and debit table, for an asset account, to debit it is to increase it. And for income account, it's kind of switched where crediting it will make it increase. So both of these are going to be increased, but using different debits and credits. And once you enter in that deposit, you can save it. And that transaction has already been created for your general ledger. So in addition to creating a deposit from a pending transaction, you can also just create one manually. I mean, sometimes it's just not going to come over from members. Maybe it's, say, interest or something. Who knows? But you can always add in a new transaction by going up here to this bar. We call this the Omni bar. If you ever needed to access just a particular account, if you click inside of this Omni bar right here, you can always choose exactly what account you wanted to look at. And it would kind of bring up this sort of just sort of the summary right here as for all of its current transactions within the current timeline. And you can also see breadcrumbs as to exactly where in the chart of accounts it actually is. But to the far right of it, you have this new transaction button, and you can use this for any transaction. If you click on here, you can see the drop-down menu, and we have a whole list of different transactions we can do. We were talking about deposits, so let's just do that one real quick. We select deposit. Very similar to the pending deposits previously, it does open up with asking for the payee memo and then your accounts. So say maybe it's just a deposit from like maybe just excess or something, and we just want to deposit it into the general fund. It's just some extra money. Similar to the pending transaction, it's not exactly going to have a payee, so no need to put that in there. If you needed to change the date, you could certainly do that. If you click inside of the field, you can choose whichever date it is that you want. I don't believe it will allow you to add in a transaction outside of your fiscal year, so that is correct. It will not let you put in something outside of your fiscal year. If you wanted to add in transactions, you would need to unlock that fiscal year, but October 12th, that works just fine for us in this aspect. So now that we have the memo and the date, now we can just add in $500. I would love to have $500 in excess. Then just add that into, say, the central trust checking. And since this is in regards to the general fund, that would be the income account that we add it to. And you will notice that for any transaction, you do have the option to make it recurring. So if this is a regular deposit, then you can always make it recurring, and it will show up in your pending transactions. But I'll visit that in just a second. After we go ahead and create our deposit, we'll go ahead and save it. And that transaction has been created. Now, even though it was strictly for the general fund, you can, create, choose more than one asset account and more than one income account if you so need. So you're not limited to how many asset accounts and income accounts, just as long as your credits and debits equal. So I did mention that you could make a recurring transaction using that software, or using that button where it said make recurring. So recurring has to be made on the day that you want it to actually start. And once you do, the next time that it is due, it will show up in your pending transactions, same as the deposits from members. So anytime you go up here and look at your pending transactions, you can see that there are plenty of recurring transactions set up, including things like the internet bill, trash pickup, bank interest, all sorts of different transactions as well. And, sometimes even though it is kind of a monthly or a semi-periodic basis, it might not be the same amount. So you're like, why would we make a recurring transaction for an internet bill if the amount is always going to change? Well, the other perk for having a pending transaction is if you select it, you can change the amount. So even if we just kind of have an internet bill or internet payment right here, we can always change it. So even if it happens on a periodic basis, when it comes up, we can always just edit it and just edit its amount accordingly. And as long as the debits and credits match, then it should have no issues in saving itself. So now we have that first transaction out of the way. Now we have something that another pretty regular transaction, and that would be checks. So, throughout your fiscal year, you're going to end up needing to either print checks or actually handwrite them. And they can be used for a number of different payments, such as paying your payroll, your church bills, and our software does allow you to create those checks as well as printing them directly from this software. We do use a format based on checks by printrevolution.co. That's .co, not .com. And you're not required to use those. However, that is just kind of the format that we base it off of. If you're using a middle check system and you had previously used that middle check format from Shepherd staff, then it should match in here in Ledger as well. So we do have two major types of different checks. We have the middle one that I had previously mentioned, and then we have the top check. And you can choose those different types by going up here to the gear icon and going into general. You can choose exactly what your check style is going to look like if you have those administrator permissions. And if you needed to use two signature checks, then you could just check that box as well. So any sort of information that you need on those checks, I would always visit the general settings if there is a question. So we'll just go back up here to the home button, just go back to the home screen, and let's just enter in some checks. So up here, we go up to the New Transaction button, and we'll select to write a check. There are some restrictions here on how to write this check. It does limit to using only asset, liability, and expense types. So here you can say it for debiting, it only allows asset or liability, and then for crediting, using expense or liability. There is going to be a check number here in addition to the memo, payee, and date. However, these aren't going to be added until you actually print the checks. So you would just want to leave that blank for right now, and they can be modified when you're actually in the print queue. So we can go ahead and say, for a sample, maybe we just want a payroll check. We're entering in payroll. We want it to be today's date. That's perfectly fine. And then we can choose our particular payee. So we can probably choose our secretary, Arlene. And bringing up my amounts because I can't remember that to save my life. First, on the debit side, you're going to want to put in Central Trust Checking and just put in that full debit amount. So for this example, we have $652.48. If I remove that zero and that, I clicked enter, and naturally, since it needs 2 line items, it threw a fit, but that's fine. Then continuing on the left side, because we can't have asset or liability, we're going to also want to put in our income taxes as well. So we can start with federal for $95.10. Keep pressing that, and it just doesn't like me. And then for state income tax for 22, Social Security tax 5167, Medicare for 1208. And then once we have all of our liabilities and assets on the left, we will attribute the entirety of the amount to staff salary on the credit side. So we have the payee, the memo, we have all the accounts set up, we left the check number blank, everything is looking good so far, and you can kind of see just a little bit of a preview as to what it's going to look like when it is printed. So if all of that information looks correct, then you can save it. And here you'll get a little message saying that your check was added to your print queue, and it did include a little link to your print queue. And if that disappears too quickly, then you can always go up here to where this little printer button is. And here is going to be all of the checks that you enter into the system. And this is going to include handwritten checks as well. And naturally, you won't need to print them. However, you still want to have that in your ledger. To actually print the check, you would go over here and select exactly who it is that you want to check. So we just created one for Arlene. We can check that box right here, and we can click the print button. And here you can just do one additional once over and just make sure that everything is looking good. Here we have the middle check type with the middle the check actually in the middle, and then the 2 stubs on either side. If everything is looking good, then you would go up to the tippy top and click this print button. And this is actually where you would add in your check number if you needed to change it. It just kind of puts in whatever the last check number was printed. If you ever needed to change that, then you certainly can. Say maybe just skip all the way to 5. And then once everything looks good and you confirm, it will take you to your print preview. And then you can just create or just choose your printer settings and set that up as you need. And I have it saved to PDF for right now, but once you go ahead and click the print button instead of save, then it will be printed. And it will eventually remove itself from your print queue. As you noticed, it didn't actually print because I saved it. But for the same idea on if you already do have that check, or if you have a handwritten check and it's in your print queue and you just kind of want to clean up this print queue, you can also select any number of checks that you have handwritten or that you just no longer need to print. And instead of clicking the print button, you can mark them as printed. And it will give you a little warning saying, are you sure? One hasn't been printed yet. So the Ameren Electric one hasn't been printed yet. Are you sure you want to remove it? And you can confirm. And once those are finished, you would be able to print those anymore. Right. For our next transaction, we have payments. So just anything that where you pay something, but you don't actually write the check or print a check. So any sort of online or electronic transactions, you can put in as payments as opposed to checks so that it doesn't mess up your check numbers and have to remove them from the print queue. Just like checks, they are limited to the asset, liability, and expense account types. And other different examples are like EFTs for utility bills or any sort of bank fees that you're just paying straight to the bank, just things like that as well. So say I want to create a payment. Go up here to New Transaction, select Payment, and say I want to make, maybe a water bill payment. A lot of things are already done online, so why not? So if I make a water payment, then you can select the payee, and if it's connected to your trash or recycling, I've seen many different areas of this, but here we have our Missouri American Water. So if we want to just pay the water company, if we wanted to choose that date just to make sure it's in the month so that it's easier for you to reconcile. And then we just go ahead and put in that payment. So for an asset, it can just be from unrestricted USAA checking. That's perfectly fine. For 145.35. And then we're going to want to make sure that it is accredited to the right expense account. So we can put water for our expenses. And with those matching, we can either save it, or since it's kind of a monthly thing, you can make it recurring. And when you add this in this little drop-down menu, you can see that you add in a new recurring transaction. You can change the name for your transaction, and then you can choose exactly how often it's going to appear in your pending transaction little queue. For water payments, we could just do every single month, and maybe it's always scheduled for the 15th. We're on the 12th, we're just paying it a little early, but from this day or from next month on, we just want to do it every 15th. Once we save that, then you can see that the transaction was created, and you go up here to the gear icon and go into your recurring transactions, you can see that that new payment has been put in. If you ever needed to change that payment, you can go over to recurring transactions, filter it if you have many transactions that are scheduled. But once you click the row, it'll just reopen it and you can update it as you need. So if you needed to update the amount, you could do that, or change how often it is that it's recurring. If you don't need to make any changes, you can just exit out. So for this recurring transaction, you already created that initial transaction for the 12th for this month. And so that's going to be for this month. And this water payment transaction isn't going to show up until next month. So anytime you need to set up a recurring transaction, you're going to have to create the initial transaction manually, and then piggybacking off of that transaction, you'll be able to create a recurring transaction, even if it's not on the exact same day. If you ever, needed to get rid of the transaction, you could go over here to the minus icon, and you can choose to delete it. And as previously stated, if you go up here to the pending transaction and it shows up, even if it's for a check or a journal entry, or here we have the internet bill again, we can always change the amount as it changes throughout the months. Go back to the home screen, and we can go to our next transaction. So that next transaction is going to be for transfers. So any sort of electronic transfers between banks and any sort of line item corrections. So since they are going to be in the same line item, it will restrict itself to only allow money to be moved between similar account types. And for the most part, when we say similar, we mean the same. Unless it has the exact same credit and debit behavior, as well as it just kind of makes sense for that particular transaction. It's pretty, we're pretty confident in saying that you're mostly just going to stick with the same account types for transfers for this particular transaction. And as such, there are two very common situations where you would use this type of transaction. One of which is when you're transferring money from a savings account to a bank account or a checking account, or, vice versa. And let's just go ahead and try that out. We'll go ahead, create a new transaction, and we'll actually finally get to the transfers. That's right there up front. And we can just put in, just for the audit log. When we look at the ledger, it just makes sense. And then you can choose your asset, expense, income, or liability. However, whichever one you choose here, this one is going to be bound by that same account type. So if we're going from savings, central trust, to central trust checking, and Maybe it's just to avoid an overdraft fee for whatever reason, and we can just move over that $200. Again, we can make it recurring for however many times that we need it, or we could just save it for that one transaction. The last transaction type that we're going to go over is journal entries. And this is just kind of the miscellaneous transaction. Anything that, you know, the previous transactions don't take care of, then most likely you would use a journal entry. So any sort of recording account balance, any sort of corrections or interest earned, uh, say from the bank, or even paying like a bank fee, you can use a journal entry just to move your money to your specific accounts. And since it's kind of the jack of all trades, it can utilize all four account types. So you can move things around as you need, as long as naturally those credits and debits end up having no difference. So say I want to add in maybe a bank interest. I can add in a journal entry. And not really needing a payee, but I can choose my account for the Central Trust checking. And maybe just have $5.40. And then just put interest income so that I can credit it. So then for debits, that's going to increase your asset account, your checking account, and then crediting will increase your interest income account as well. And you can always save that as well. Now, for say if you had a specific correction that you needed to make, some instances you might choose the wrong offset account. So maybe the different income account or a different expense account. As long as they are the same type that you need to move those funds over, then you can go ahead and use the transfer since they are going to be the same account type. Otherwise, if in doubt, you can always use a journal entry. Now, in addition to correcting transactions, there might come a time where you just need to completely void a transaction as well. And if you do go through with voiding that transaction, it will effectively cancel whatever that transaction was doing. So instead of it just kind of just going poof and there's no trace of it, it actually creates a reverse transaction kind of in the background of the software, and then just kind of groups those transactions together, which effectively cancels them both out. So, if you made a payment in error, then you could always void that transaction. And so just kind of underneath the hood, there's going to be a reverse transaction that adds those funds back in, but all you're going to see is just that transaction has been voided. And just kind of due to its nature, voiding out a transaction it's a permanent process, so it cannot be undone. And so it's definitely worth erring on the side of caution, just making sure that you actually do need to void this transaction. And if you are ever in doubt, you can always use a journal entry as well. Another thing to keep in mind for different transactions is that if the transaction has been cleared in a reconciliation, then it's cleared the bank. So it cannot be voided. You would actually have to create a journal entry. And this is just so, it just doesn't further affect your amounts. But if it's been posted, but it hasn't been cleared out, then those voided transactions will not affect your reconciliation. So you don't have to worry about that. And if you do ever want to like print out your ledger, so see it right here. If I chose general ledger and say I wanted to get rid of my interest income. So say maybe I already inputted it for this month, and so I don't need this one to this month. I can always open up this journal entry by going to the general ledger and reopening that transaction and clicking the void button. And just kind of as a sanity check, it just wants to make sure, are you absolutely sure it's a permanent process? And you can confirm right there. So then that $5.40, it will be put back. And if you had like a report in your general ledger where it showed up, I think if you refresh it here, you can see in these, they're kind of highlighted in pink. It's just to let you know that yes, it has been voided. So here for the interest income for both your checking account and your interest income account, those have been voided. So it shouldn't affect your totals. If it does bother you that these are here and it kind of makes the amounts look a little off, then you can definitely export to Excel and then remove those lines, and it'll let you know if they've been voided or not. So once you've gone ahead and inputted all of these transactions, it might be worth checking up on your income and expense just to make sure that everything is being attributed correctly. So tomorrow we're going to go into more of the reporting side of 360 Ledger, but I just wanted to point out that at any time, if you're putting in your transactions and you just want to make sure, just double checking that everything is looking all right, then you can always go up to this spiral bound notebook and it will show you our 4 main reports as well as the event log if you want to see who's making transactions or editing them. So for income and expense, then you can definitely show exactly what those transactions are doing in regards to, say, your budget that you entered in earlier this year. So just wanted to point that out, and if you ever needed to look just at all of your transactions, you can definitely look at General Ledger or use the Omnibar or just any sort of report that might be helpful in making sure everything is being entered in correctly. So that is kind of the cusp of it. So I am just going to, looks like we have about 10 more minutes. So if it's okay, I'm going to skip that intermission and we're just going to go off to the quiz, and then we'll just dedicate the rest of the time to Q&As. And if you guys need to head out early, then please feel free to do so. So just for our quiz, I just have a few questions just to make sure that I did hit all the points that I needed to today. And my first question is, does a pending deposit from Church360 members, does it have to have its total given to each fund broken down into each line on the income side of the transaction? Wait a few more seconds. All right. So it was a very specific question, but the answer is true. So thank you guys who entered in true, because that is correct. Just any sort of pending deposit, anything that's into your account side or any sort of side, really. It's going to have its own line just so that you can select your accounts more clearly. My next question. If I have a handwritten check, will it or will it not appear in the print queue? Why would it be in the print queue if I don't need to print it? Three, two, one. All right then. And that is false. Any check that you enter in, it is going to go to the print queue. And if you don't need to actually print it from the computer, you can always check the box and mark it as printed. True or false? You cannot review or edit a pending transaction until after it's posted. All right then. And that is false. Whenever you post a pending transaction, you're always going to have the opportunity to change it, which makes it really handy for those different payments and bills that you have every month. If you create a journal entry, if you need to credit a bank account, that means it's going to decrease. Right. And this is going to be true. So usually when you hear debits and credits, you think debit goes up and credit goes down, usually because you're applying it to an asset. So it is probably what you usually think of when credit makes it go down. And last but not least, can you or can you not void any transaction regardless of status or what year the transaction is written for? Or are you going to have to make journal entries for them all? All right then, thank you for playing my game. because that answer is false. So I'm not sure if I actually mentioned it, but you can only create transactions within your own fiscal year, and you can also void transactions only if that fiscal year is unlocked and you're inside of it. So in addition to not being able to mark it as void if it's cleared. So in those aspects, especially if it's a past fiscal year, you already have those reports already printed and sent out. So it's probably just better just to create a journal entry for those exceptions for those transactions. But otherwise, you shouldn't have any issues in voiding your transactions and creating those. So now I turn it over to you guys. Are there any questions about transactions that I can kind of elaborate for you? Was this just a refresher? If there is something specific to your ledger site, we can definitely arrange a call or maybe an email with further information. Nope. Y'all are smart cookies. You already know. But if you guys ever need support help, please feel free to reach out to us. And so I'll just end it by saying thank you so much for attending this webinar. Thank you for giving me your time. I do hope you enjoyed it. If we are going to be sending out a survey, so if there's anything that you'd like us to cover in a future webinar, please feel free to uh, fill out those surveys, and we do read every single one, so please feel free to let us know exactly how we can serve you and your church better. So I'll just head out now and just wish you guys a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much.